There she was, his wife, reclining on the couch. She had a smile on her face that could also be construed as a smirk. Her blue eyes were on him and only him, her face unchanging. She was lying on her side with her right arm draped over her side and hip. Her full breasts were firm thanks to silicone implants, hiding the fact that she had nursed 2 children. Her tan and toned right leg was visible. A bottle of Spanish Cava Barcino lay on its side, uncorked and empty. She was holding an empty champagne glass with a second empty glass on the floor. He wondered who she was having a champagne party with that evening. Then he heard the gasps and whispers of the 80 people in the gallery as they recognized who was in the portrait. They were mostly patrons and associates of hers, people she knew well, and now they knew even more about her. The whispers turned to soft clapping as the group enjoyed their first view of the Spanish artist Rolando Ramirez's painting of Carol Digger nude. Carol had been the city's arts executive director for the past 6 years and was the founder of the Traveling Artists Program, where semi-popular artists from around the world spend a year in her city working with the Arts Commission. It had been very successful, and Rolando's year would be over in a few days. This night's black tie gala was to display the works of many people in the community, and Rolando's painting was the grand finale. This was not what Gabriel was expecting. Carol Diggers had been Gabriel's wife for almost 20 years. It was his impression that no one other than himself and her gynecologist had seen her nude during that time. Gabriel, or Gabe for short, came from a family that had been in this city for over 75 years. His grandfather was a laborer for a dirt-moving company, leveling out hills to create a solid foundation for the thousands of homes that would come later. His father started an earth-moving company using bulldozers and road graders. His father was very successful but was also a no-nonsense, hard-working family man who cared deeply for his wife and 5 kids. Gabe was the eldest and was the first to go to work for his father at 12 years old. An important task was one of the first jobs his grandfather did when he arrived here, a job that still needed to be done and would always be needed, grave digging. His grandfather dug graves by hand, and his father used a backhoe. Young Gabe's job was to jump down into a freshly dug grave after the backhoe had done its job and square up all the hole's edges so that the coffin could be lowered gracefully and rest level on the bottom. This was fun at first, but eventually, it became something he dreaded. Despite this, he valued the experience. In high school, his Scandinavian genetics and hard physical work created a lean, strong football player for one of the city's high schools. Gabe used every shovel full of dirt to improve his strength and flexibility, conscious of his form and muscle development. The end result was a junior in high school who stood 64 and weighed 225 pounds with speed and agility. The coach played him as a linebacker because he could accelerate into a developing hole and crush the small running back just as he got to the line of scrimmage. During a scrimmage with his teammates, he was awarded the nickname Gravedigger because of the way he picked up running backs and viciously slammed them onto the ground. On the football field, he was very aggressive, but passive in the rest of his life. Gabriel was an average boy who benefited from his home lifestyle of reading and discussions with adults. His father had spent a huge sum of money to buy his children an encyclopedia. This large series of books was the evening's entertainment if there was no homework. Gabe was fascinated by pictures of great artists, while his brothers preferred National Geographic for the occasional Aboriginal breast, and his sisters were always giddy the week that the new Reader's Digest arrived. The home television was used only for local news and weather, later expanded to include local sports programs that sometimes featured videos of Gabe's vicious hits on the football field. He was a quiet guy, not shy, just not very talkative. He was not afraid to be around other people and was attentive to their conversations. His mother feared his lack of conversation was shyness and made sure he attended his senior prom. They made a deal. He would agree to go to prom but did not have to ask a girl for a date. He had lots of fun and danced with a number of different girls. The girls in his class thought he was sweet and a nice guy and would have gone out with him if he had asked. Gabe received an athletic scholarship to a 4-year college 2 hours away from home. His nickname followed him to his new school, and he soon became a fan favorite, especially when he blasted a running back trying to evade him. Unlike his teammates, he was in college to gain enough knowledge to build a good life for himself. He enjoyed working at the business his grandfather started and majored in business. Late in the football season of his senior year, he went into a bar that was a student hangout with some teammates. While chatting with his buddies, he heard a woman say, "Stop that, leave me alone." It wasn't uncommon for couples to argue after a few beers, but this sounded more like distress. He turned and saw three guys surrounding a pretty girl, talking to her and pulling at her clothes. She kept slapping their hands and struggling to cover her large breasts from being mauled. Being the nice guy he was, he went to her rescue. As he inserted his large frame between the three jerks and the girl, he said, "Guys, I think you need to leave her alone." This brought the usual response from a jerk, "Buzz off, fat boy. This is none of your business." That was until one of the other jerks said, "Oh, it's Gravedigger." "I'm sorry, Digger. We were just teasing. We'll go now." The guy turned and started pushing his drunken buddies back. One of the jerks said, "Buzz off," and turned like he was leaving. From the way he turned, Gabe knew this guy would try to sucker punch him, so he subtly changed his footing to counter the swing. Sure enough, the guy swung at Gabe's face with his right hand. His fist was caught midair by Gabe's big left paw. Gabe's open right hand swung around and slapped him in the face. The guy's body did a full 360 degrees spin before he fell to the floor, his eyes glazed over. All he could mumble was, "What the hell was that?" The crowd howled with laughter at this fool. They knew that if Gravedigger had used his fists, the guy would either be dead or have a broken jaw. His friends picked up the punk and dragged him out to the laughter and jeers of the students. Gabe turned to the pretty brown-haired girl and said, "Are you okay?" She replied, "Yes, thank you so much." He could tell she was still upset and said, "Come sit with me in this booth until they go away." He didn't want to imply that she was still scared or afraid. "I would like that," she mumbled. The waitress came over to see if the young lady was okay, and Gabe asked for a couple of Cokes. He turned to the still shaken woman and said, "I'm Gabe, short for Gabriel." "What's your name?" "My name is Carol Martin." "Did I hear him call you Gravedigger?" "Gravedigger is my football name." "I'm just Gabe." She brightened up and said, "I watch you every Saturday afternoon. My sorority girlfriends and I are big fans of yours. They will die knowing I'm sitting here having a Coke with you." Then the usual college question and answer ritual began. "What's your major? Where are you from? What are you going to do after graduation?" Carol was an art major and wanted to eventually run an art gallery. While talking, she was surprised that Gabe was asking all the questions. He was genuinely interested in her and what she was passionate about, unlike most athletes she had met, who were more interested in impressing her with their accomplishments. When Gabe told her he was also interested in art classes, she decided to test his sincerity. "Have you taken any art classes here? Our art department is supposedly one of the best in this part of the country." He smiled and said, "Yes, I have. I know I'm not skilled at creating art, but I have a great passion for the visual arts, particularly painting. So far, I've taken Art Appreciation 1 and 2. Carol was surprised by his response. She pressed, "Who was your instructor?" He replied, "Dr. Benson, the funny little guy with the unique accent. I was in that class." "I didn't see you. Where did you sit? How could I have missed a guy like you?" "Back row." "For two reasons. Nobody could see around or over me if I sat up front, plus I was always a couple of minutes late for my business management 2 class on the other side of campus." Gabe watched as some guys approached him again, looking like they might cause trouble, but they quickly changed their tune. They backed off and said, "Whoa, we come in peace. We want to apologize for being rude to your friend." Gabe was going to clarify that Carol wasn't his girlfriend, but he didn't. The one who had been the most obnoxious turned to her and said, "Carol, I'm sorry I offended you. Please forgive my poor behavior. I didn't know you were with Gravedigger." Carol started to say, "I'm not with him," but didn't. Gabe shook their hands, and they left the bar. Carol said, "Wow, you have a real presence in a room, don't you?" Those guys were practically shaking. "All the men in this bar admire you, and all the women are probably envious of me being with you. I'm so glad we met. Can we get together again sometime when you don't have to save me?" With a big smile, he said, "Yes, I'd like that. Can I drive you home?" "You sure can, Gravedigger," she said with the sweetest voice. As soon as he dropped her off, she turned and kissed his cheek, saying, "Remember that until another time." Her evening wasn't spent studying, it was spent recounting her story of being rescued by the Gravedigger. The girls in her sorority couldn't wait for him to come by and meet him. As the end of the football season approached and his team made the playoffs, Gabe's time became more limited. He wanted to maintain his academic standing, so his study time took up what was left of his free time. He kept in touch with Carol through texts, FaceTime, and phone calls. They managed to have some one-hour study breaks by making Starbucks runs, though many of the sorority girls wanted to chat with the Gravedigger during their coffee breaks. Gabe faced the same situation with Carol being the object of other athletes' attention. If they went to his dorm, they both realized how attractive they were to each other's friends, who fully supported their relationship. They had spent enough time together that they wanted to grow closer, but their privacy and time were limited. They promised that next semester would be different since football season would be over. Gabe's team made it to the playoffs, but his Fighting Tigers were beaten in the quarterfinal game. Carol had left her sorority house at the end of the semester to spend Christmas with her family, 3 hours away, while Gabe continued to practice and work through the playoffs. Their only communication continued to be electronic. With Christmas behind them and Gabe preparing for his final football game, Carol and Gabe decided to spend New Year's together. Carol asked if Gabe was okay with going to Kansas City to spend a few days visiting 2 great art museums. After checking his calendar, he responded, "I would love to do that with you, with only one change in plans. I'll go to any art museum you want, provided you come with me on Sunday afternoon to Arrowhead Stadium to watch the Kansas City Chiefs play football." She laughed and said, "That's fine, but don't try to stay late and get autographs." Smiling, he said, "Great, we have a deal. I'll get the football tickets and arrange the hotel while you line up the museums." As Gabe drove, Carol talked constantly about her Christmas with her family and friends. Gabe enjoyed every minute with her, listening to what had happened in her life since they last met. He had arranged for a hotel room near the plaza, an upscale entertainment and dining area. After putting their luggage in the room, Gabe took her to her first surprise of the evening, a horse-drawn carriage ride around the plaza. All the rooftops were lit up with white lights, and a light snow was falling on them as they cuddled under a buffalo hide blanket. They walked arm in arm back to their hotel in the snowfall. He asked, "Would you like a drink at the hotel bar?" Quickly, she answered, "No, I'd rather spend time with you." Beaming, he replied, "Then let's make the most of our evening," and they headed to the elevator. By the time they reached their room, the snow had melted off their coats and shoes. After a lingering hug in the middle of the room, they began to relax and enjoy each other's company. Carol couldn't help but admire how strong and kind Gabe was. He, in turn, appreciated how genuine and thoughtful she was. As they spent more time together, their bond grew even stronger. Both felt this was a special connection, and they looked forward to seeing where their relationship would take them in the future. She laughed and began to playfully tickle him, surprised at how ticklish he was despite his imposing physique. Their passionate encounter marked the end of the old year and the start of the new one, celebrated with Carol expressing her joy. They ordered room service, and Carol, wearing only an unbuttoned shirt, answered the door. The young delivery man glanced at her with a mix of surprise and admiration. He declined a tip but requested more snacks later, asking for Robert to deliver them. Carol and Gabe shared a laugh as Robert left the room. Gabe felt a bit unsettled by her willingness to show herself off. Noticing his discomfort, she said, "I don't mind being seen. We all have similar bodies, mine just happens to be more visible. For me, it's okay for people to look but not touch, unless it's you." With that in mind, she walked to the window and drew the curtains wide open. "Let the world see us as we are. I'm not afraid of what others think, and you shouldn't be either. You have a beautiful body, and there's no reason to hide. Just remember, no one else touches you, only me." The next day, after waking up, they spent the day at the Kemper Museum of Contemporary Art. Carol was beside herself, experiencing all the different artists and their messages. She made sure Gabe enjoyed the nude portraits, paintings, and sculptures to justify her feeling of freedom. Even though it was a fine winter day, Carol was cold at the football game and used that excuse to cuddle with Gabe under a heavy blanket, a blanket that allowed her hands to brush against him to keep her fingers warm, or so she said. The Chiefs' victory was not as much fun as their time together. Carol had the bright idea of stopping by her parents' house on the way back so they could meet Gabe. At this point, he was ready to do whatever she wanted, even if it meant a detour of 3 hours. Her parents' house was as average as a house could be, but the people inside were not as normal as he expected from the appearance of the furniture and decorations. It seemed they were trapped in a time warp, resembling a movie set for a hippie sitcom from the late 1960s. They were intelligent and talented in music, art, and literature, having been in bands that traveled the Midwest but never made it big. They enjoyed the company of the large, quiet man who was obviously in love with their daughter. Since he was driving, Gabe declined the magic smoke bowl that was passed around. Later, Carol's mother brought out a bowl of rabbit and gerbil food for the evening's nourishment. Gabe was by nature a carnivore and saw no protein source larger than a garbanzo bean, so he planned on having steak and eggs for breakfast the next morning. He understood why her parents were so slim and fit, they practiced starving themselves. As they prepared to leave, Carol's mother gave Gabe a full-body hug and a kiss on the lips. She made sure he knew that she did not believe in putting her large breasts in a bra. Her father and Gabe had a man hug and backslap at the door. As they drove off, Carol asked Gabe if he liked her parents. "I liked them. They were real people who liked being themselves and didn't care about what anyone else thinks. They enjoy life as they make it for themselves. This world would be better off with more people like them." Carol sat there amazed. Wow, you really dissected the past 30 years of their lives in one paragraph. You don't talk a lot, but when you do, something really cerebral comes out. I'm so lucky for you to fall in love with me. Very lucky. Gabe just shook his head and smiled. At the start of their last semester, Gabe and Carol moved in together into a modest off-campus apartment. It wasn't difficult for Gabe, but it was unusual for him that Carol would strip naked as soon as she got home from classes. At first, he thought it was her way of telling him that she wanted him to make love to her. She eventually told him that just because she was naked didn't mean she needed him to make love to her at that moment. He was welcome to do that whenever he wanted, but there was no requirement just because she was naked. She explained that being naked gave her a sense of freedom. As they compared class schedules, Carol told Gabe, "I have a job every Tuesday and Thursday at 4 p.m. It lasts for at least an hour and I get paid $100 per class." Gabe expressed his surprise. "Wow, that's good pay for only an hour. What do you do to get $100 per hour?" "It's a modeling job for the class drawing the human form. It's a level 4 course for seniors only, with usually no more than 12 people," replied Carol. "What do you model?" he questioned. "I model me," she answered. Gabe pushed further. "How do you model yourself?" "I don't understand." She said, just above a whisper, "I model me. I am a nude model for the class." "You certainly have the body for it, but I'm surprised I fell for a stripper," he said. Sternly, she responded, "I am not a stripper." I do not take off my clothes so men can leer at my body. This is for the development and promotion of the arts. Students need to learn to draw the human body. I pose for 6 weeks of classes, then a guy poses for the next 6 weeks. He is definitely not a stripper. The last 6 weeks of the semester are for group drawings, and I do not pose with anyone else. She continued, now, if you wanted to bring that magnificent body of yours to the class, they would love to have you pose by yourself and with me. How about it, big boy? We could make $200 for an hour's work. You like being around me when I'm naked, don't you? I don't think I could do that, was all he could say. Gabe, I've been modeling for that class since my freshman year. You've seen how my parents live. I've had to scramble to have enough money to get through school. This was easy, quick, and safe. I know girls who strip at clubs, and I would never do that. I'd rather starve to death. Gabe mumbled something that sounded like, just what do you do? Carol said, I have a contract with the school and a set of my own rules for the sitting. Everyone puts their cell phones in a box upon entering class. No one takes my picture ever. No one ever touches me. If they do, I'm out of there, and the school still pays me at the end of my sessions. The instructor grades all the drawings and gives them to me, so no one walks out with a drawing of me nude. You won't see my likeness on any dorm wall. If I like the drawings, I will keep them. If not, they are burned in a pottery kiln. Can I show you the drawings I've kept? Sure, he stuttered. Carol brought out a dozen drawings and paintings of different sizes from the closet and put them on a table. She smiled, waved her hand like Vanna White, and said, come see my portfolio. He shuffled through the pictures and exclaimed, these are beautiful, exceptionally good works of art. I can't believe these are just student works. I'm surprised you don't have them up on a wall. She hugged him and said, they are my private items, only to be seen by those who love me, and I love them. You and my parents are the only ones outside of the class who have seen these. What did your parents think of you posing nude? He questioned, smiling. She said, who do you think gave me the idea? You've met my mom. She was never a stripper, but she did a lot of art class nude modeling. This is something I never thought would happen. Give me some time to come to grips with this risque behavior. I don't want to tell you what you can and can't do, but I can tell you if I approve or not, she said, while stroking her chin with a smirk. Can I put this painting up on the wall in my den? Carol could not contain her laughter and said, of course, but remember, no one else is to see it. Seriously, Gabe, I would like you to come to a session where I am modeling to see what goes on. If you don't want to go, I could video a typical class for you. He replied, I'll think about it. Okay, her response was. While you're thinking about it, remember this class starts next week, and I am under contract to do it. The end result was Gabe's acceptance of her nude modeling, but he did have one caveat. He would walk her to and from her class every time she posed. That was entirely acceptable to Carol. Both Carol and Gabe graduated in the spring. Gabe had a job lined up with his father in the dirt-moving business. His business management degree would be a welcome addition to his father's growing business. Carol did not find an art gallery to work at but was fortunate to find employment as an art teacher within the city school system. She had to travel between different locations during the day, but that was not a problem. Gabe proposed marriage to Carol at Christmas, with a June wedding as soon as school was out. The wedding was not a huge social event for the city, but the barn party on his father's farm was a big hit with both Gabe and Carol's friends. Carol was surprised when Gabe drove her to the train station. They were taking Amtrak to Santa Fe, New Mexico. The newlyweds stayed at La Posada, a 4.5-star luxury hotel built in 1935. The hotel was in the center of the city's art district and a meeting place for many art enthusiasts. Her appreciation of him bringing her to such a city was overwhelming. Even though he was only 22 years old, he was seriously considering finding a Viagra dispenser. They started their day with making love, followed by a southwestern breakfast, then a shower, and going to art galleries in the afternoons. The evenings, with the smell of pinyon pine burning in chimneys, were spent walking up and down Canyon Road to visit the many art and sculpture galleries. Since it was tourist season, many galleries treated their guests to wine and delightful cheeses. The real treat for Carol was a day-long trip to Abiquiu, where Georgia O'Keeffe had her main studio and spent most of her time. Even though Gabe was quiet about it, he was delighted to take in her beautiful artwork. Georgia O'Keeffe was his favorite American artist, and he really enjoyed the time they spent where she performed her artistry. With the glow of honeymoon bliss behind them, they moved into a rental house in Gabe's hometown. Gabe's mother was delighted to have a new daughter, and the two became close. His father was pleased to have his hard-working son back in town. Not only was he a trusted worker, but his management skills seemed to improve every month. In addition to her high school teaching, Carol began doing some volunteer work with the city's Arts Commission. Her knowledge and enthusiasm for the arts were appreciated by the commission. On their second wedding anniversary, they found out Carol was pregnant with twins. She took 4 months of maternity leave and a summer off, then went back to teaching. After teaching and volunteering at the Arts Commission for years, Carol was appointed as the executive director of the City Arts Commission. This role was close to the exact career Carol had planned for herself. Gabe and his father had grown the business and were quite prosperous. Gabe had added more technology to their company, including directional drills, ground-penetrating radar, and new trenching equipment. Citizens joked that their company still did all the grave digging in the community, although it was more for community benefit than company revenue. Gabe's nickname of Gravedigger became part of the corporate name. With this prosperity, Gabe was given a 40-acre tract of land off his father's farm to build a home. They decided that an arts and crafts home style would be the best for their forever home. The twin boys, Carrie and Kim, enjoyed life on the farm, each having their own horse. To help the boys learn responsibility, they had horses, calves, and chickens to feed twice a day. The City Arts Commission thrived under Carol's leadership and drive. More people were attending classes, speakers, and events. Using some of her Santa Fe connections from her honeymoon, Carol started by inviting successful artists to come to town to discuss their philosophies and thoughts about the arts. The latest artist was Rolando Ramirez from Barcelona, Spain, who was contracted to stay for 1 year. His duties included teaching painting and drawing classes, giving lectures, and promoting the work of the Arts Commission. Additionally, he would have time to continue his own painting and was asked to share these works within the context of his teaching. For the first several weeks, Rolando was in town. Carol escorted him to various meetings, lunches, and dinners. He made short presentations at the city council, city libraries, Lions Club, various schools, and other civic organizations. Several country clubs offered him complimentary membership, allowing him to eat, drink, and entertain at the club without paying dues. Rolando was a smooth talker, especially around the ladies. To the local women, he appeared very sophisticated, mainly because he came from Europe. He was not quite as tall as the average American male, standing at 59. His hair was jet black and slick, usually pulled back in a ponytail. He was thin but not particularly fit or muscular. Every evening that Carol was home, she told Gabe about what Rolando said, did, and thought, to the point that Gabe was tired of hearing about the new Spaniard in town. Before they had time to meet, Gabe, in typical style, did not express his opinion vocally about having too much discussion about Rolando. Of course, Gabe realized that this new artist in town developed a renewed interest in the Arts Commission, which Carol felt was very important both for her employment and her genuine interest in the arts. One evening during dinner, Carol told Gabe that she would like to have Rolando to their home for dinner. He said, "If that is what you want to do, I'm fine with it. He probably will not enjoy a trip out into the country to have dinner at a property that has a barn and animals." She replied, "He's so polite, he'll never complain about coming here. Are you free next Wednesday evening to have him here?" The boys have a 4-H supper and meeting that night. Yes, he said, thinking, might as well get this over with. The following Wednesday, he came home early, showered, and dressed up in slacks and a Tommy Bahama silk shirt. Carol wore a new lightweight sundress that flattered her hips, waist, and breasts. Gabe thought, that's too nice a dress to be entertaining this guy. Carol was concerned when Rolando was half an hour late. She was about to call his cell phone when she saw his BMW coming down the gravel driveway. A sweaty and disgruntled Rolando crawled out of the car and slammed the door. Why in the world would anyone want to live this far outside of civilization? I drove for miles on a dirt road and saw nothing but grass and wild animals. Carol, my love, why in God's name do you put up with this isolation? Laughing, she said, it is so peaceful in the evenings. We love it here. As Rolando approached the house, he put both hands on Carol to kiss her hello. Gabe thought it was presumptuous for him to have his hands on her for 30 seconds. Still with his arm around her, Rolando turned his gaze toward Gabe and said, "Oh, I believe this is your husband, the Dirtmeister." Gabe heard the snide remark but kept his face neutral. He did not walk forward to greet the Spaniard but waited for him to come greet the host. Carol grabbed Rolando's hand and pulled him to meet her husband. Gabe extended his hand and was greeted by a dead fish handshake from Rolando. Gabe smiled and said, "Glad to meet you." Rolando replied, "My lovely Carol has told me that we should meet." Rolando presented Gabe with a couple of bottles of 1730 Pedro Jimenez Spanish wine and said, "Be careful how you open that delicate bottle." As they drank the first bottle of wine, Rolando told the American couple about his world travels and people in the art world who are his friends. Carol sat in rapt attention upon hearing the names of famous artists. After dinner, as the third bottle of wine was opened gently by the host, Rolando asked, "Gabe, I've been meaning to ask, how much dirt can a dirt man dig if a dirt man digs all day?" He laughed at his own humor. Carol politely chuckled but clearly thought this was out of bounds. She smiled at Gabe and knew he was holding his temper because of her. At another time, another guy might have had Gabe grabbing the top of their head and squeezing so hard their eyeballs would bug out. She knew he was holding back and would reward him for that later. That evening, Gabe finally said, "Enough dirt to make a good, not extravagant, but good living." He was pleased with his life, his wife, his boys, and his home. What more could he want? Continuing his perceived snubs, Rolando asked, "Gabe, who is your favorite artist?" "Charles Schultz, maybe." Quickly, Carol said, "Rolando, the name is Gabe, not Gabby, just as your name is Rolando, not Rates." Gabe snickered at her remark. Slowly, Gabe said, "A man's home is his castle and should be a place of peace and tranquility. This house is styled in the arts and crafts vision of simplicity and quality, not quite as showy as Frank Lloyd Wright but similar with a toned-down theme. My favorite European artist is Carl Oscar Larsen. His work came after the Impressionists Monet and Renoir. He was a forerunner of the arts and crafts movement and used watercolors to portray an idyllic family lifestyle. Unlike the modernists, you will find a number of his works here in our home. Georgia O'Keeffe is my favorite American artist." This answer was not something Rolando expected from a dirt digger. He thought Gabe's favorite painting would be something like dogs playing poker on velvet. Carol said, "Shall we call this an evening? I need my beauty sleep, and Gabe always gets up early for work." They all rose at the same time, and Rolando once again put his hands on Carol to kiss her cheek and say, "Good night, my dear. I can help make those moments a bit less explicit while keeping the intensity of the interactions." As Rolando drove out of the driveway, Carol turned to Gabe and said, "Lock the doors, turn out the lights, and head upstairs." She then hurried up the stairway. Gabe, feeling uneasy, entered their bedroom, where Carol's stern voice stopped him in his tracks. "Stop right there, mister," she commanded. Before he could react, she approached him with a forceful determination. "I'll teach you to speak about our home like that," she said, and their interaction quickly became passionate and intense. Carol made it clear that if Gabe ever spoke so sentimentally about his home and family again, he would face even harsher consequences. Gabe could only manage a breathless, "Yes, ma'am," in response. For the next 8 months, Carol kept her husband and Rolando as separate as possible. Their interactions remained polite but distant. Rolando was surprised by Gabe's indifference to his provocations, not realizing that Gabe was simply unaffected by his taunts. Early in the summer, during a Chamber of Commerce meeting, Bob Platter, president of Gabe's bank, took him aside and said, "Can I buy you a beer and talk privately?" "Sure," Gabe replied. "Let's go next door to Polly's pub." Once settled, Bob confided, "I'm sure you've heard Patty and I are getting a divorce." "Yes, that's unfortunate. You've been married over 20 years, haven't you?" Bob sighed, "Yes, 20 years, until that Spaniard came to town. He filled her head with romantic notions, and now she's deeply entangled with him. He even sent me videos of their time together, just to humiliate me. I'm devastated, especially with the kids still in high school. Patty is angry with me for not providing a more glamorous life. My attorney says I'm facing a tough situation both socially and financially. I want to reconcile with her, but I can't do so as long as he's around," Bob continued. "That sounds awful, Bob. If there's anything I can do to help, just let me know," Gabe offered. "We need to find a way to get him out of town. He's still causing trouble, and I heard he got Chloe Henderson pregnant too. If you could persuade Carol to help in getting him out, it would be a huge relief." He even mentioned doing a nude painting of Carol before he leaves, which would only add to the humiliation. Gabe, deeply troubled, assured Bob, "I'll do my best to convince Carol to take action. Thanks for the heads up. I can't imagine life without my Carol." Gabe had no doubt that the slimy creep wanted to have sex with Carol. Who wouldn't? She's gorgeous. Plus, Rolando liked to humiliate the husbands of his conquests. It was going to be difficult to talk to Carol about this, as she knew that Gabe disliked Rolando. After their boys had left the supper table to do their homework, Gabe decided to approach Carol about the Rolando problem. He asked, "How are things going with the Arts Commission this month?" She answered, "Great. Most of our classes are full, and there just seems to be more energy all around." "Are Rolando's classes and lectures being well attended?" "Yes, they are. We have to add extra chairs to fit everyone in." He asked, "By everyone, do you mean all the ladies, or are there many men attending?" With a puzzled look on her face, she said, "Come to think of it, there are few men in the classes. I just thought it was because they were at work and couldn't attend. The night classes are mostly working women." I never thought of that," he said cautiously. "Considering how he treated me when we first met, maybe he treats all the men rudely so they don't attend. Is it because he's intimidated by men, or would he prefer to be around ladies without the men?" "Carol, I've been approached by some local men who are taking exception to the amount of attention he's paying to their wives. One man even told me his wife and Rolando were having an affair. Have you heard anything about this?" Carol responded, "No, not at all. But Rolando is a hands-on kind of guy. He's always giving hugs and kisses to all the ladies. That's just his way. He's very complimentary to women, as most husbands are not. That can create strife." Gabe said, "Yeah, that's probably what's going on. But I thought I'd better inform you of what I'm hearing. If there's some problem, you'll need to nip it in the bud before the Arts Commission and you get embarrassed." With a grin, she said, "Thank you for looking out for me. That's why I love you." Unknown to Gabe, Rolando had convinced Carol to have him paint a nude portrait of her for their 20th anniversary. The painting would be done in one of the Arts Commission's studios, which was in an old downtown warehouse. The portrait would be for Carol and Gabe's eyes only, it would not be on open display. Carol knew that while she still displayed all the physical charms that all women have, the calendar was turning 50, and she did not want to wait until then, as she felt she could only go downhill from here. No clothes were shed during the first meeting about Carol's nude portrait. They discussed the sitting, topic, accessories, background, and physical stance. Rolando drew out a quick sketch of what they thought would accomplish Carol's dream portrait. It was agreed that they would meet in that warehouse on Thursday evenings at 6 p.m. until the portrait was completed. Despite Rolando's recommendation, Carol was not nude during the first 3 sittings. She knew he had canvas work to do prior to her stripping. She was quite nervous on the 4th session when she knew she had to be nude. Rolando had a bottle of very nice white wine for her. She felt Rolando was a little too complimentary about her physical assets. At that time, Rolando broke one of Carol's basic rules, "Thou shalt not touch." She stopped him mid-sentence and said, "Hey, we agreed on no touching. If you want me to move something, you tell me, you do not touch me." He apologized profusely for his unwanted familiarity. Rolando, noticing Carol's hesitance to be nude around him, decided to make a gesture of equality. He stripped off his clothes, saying, "I see you're a bit uncomfortable, so let's level the playing field. Now neither of us has an advantage over the other." He then stepped in front of his easel and made an exaggerated bow, revealing himself in a theatrical manner. Carol stifled a smile at the sight, as his physique was less impressive than her husband's. Rolando misinterpreted Carol's reaction as a challenge but remained confident that his charm would win her over by the end of the sessions. The Thursday night sessions, lasting between 60 and 90 minutes, involved Carol maintaining the same pose while Rolando spent the time complimenting her beauty. His remarks occasionally hinted at criticisms of Gabe, though they were never direct insults. He believed he had ample time to win her over, and he was also pursuing other interests. Gabe observed Carol's interactions with Rolando carefully. She didn't show typical signs of infidelity. If she seemed refreshed after the Thursday sessions, he made sure she hadn't been with anyone else beforehand. She didn't rush to shower or hide any marks. Discussions about Rolando were always in a broader context, not solely focused on him. Gabe used the opportunity to mention other issues, like Chloe Henderson's pregnancy and Bob Platter's divorce, and Carol's responses were concerned but non-committal. She noted that Rolando's contract was nearing its end and reassured him that things would return to normal afterward. As the painting neared completion, Carol came home one evening brimming with excitement. At dinner, she shared, "I've been invited to New York City to help Rolando set up a one-man show at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. We'll spend a couple of days there, and then have a private tour of the Met. Rolando has arranged for us to dine with several prominent artists. The Met will provide a 3-bedroom apartment with a view of Central Park for us during our stay." Kim and Carrie were thrilled by the news, but Gabe had concerns. While he supported Carol's dream, he was wary of Rolando's influence. He knew he had to devise a plan to ensure Carol's safety. A week later, sensing Gabe's unease about the trip, Carol asked, "You don't seem as excited about this trip as I am. Is there a problem? Do you think I shouldn't go?" "I want you to enjoy your trip to New York and do everything you've planned," Gabe replied, "but I'm worried about Rolando." "Are you trying to stop me from going with Rolando?" she asked. "No, just not with him," Gabe said. Now she was getting upset. "I can handle him, no problem. We have a deal, no touching. He treats me like a lady." Looking directly into her eyes, he said, "It just isn't going to happen." Back and forth they went. "Why not?" "Not going to happen." "Give me a reason." "Not happening. Period." "Are you forbidding me?" "No, I don't want you to go." "Then I will go to New York." "Not going to happen." They finally reached a stalemate and stopped talking to each other. It was quiet at breakfast, but not freezing cold. Both knew the other's point, but each had their reasons for their stance. Gabe went into the bedroom as Carol was dressing, gave her a kiss, and said, "I really love you. I could not live without you, you know that, don't you?" She responded with a kiss and then said, "I know, and I love you too." Gabe went to the office for an hour to make sure Gravediggers Incorporated was functioning smoothly. He told Barbara, his secretary, office manager, and friend, that he would be gone for the rest of the day on a special project. He called the local Case construction equipment dealership and asked if he could try out the new Case 5690 Super backhoe. Gabe said he needed a 30-foot bucket for a test. The dealer was ecstatic, as Gravediggers Incorporated had a reputation for buying good equipment. The dealer loaded the new backhoe onto Gabe's trailer and asked to join him. "Nah, I don't want to waste your time," Gabe said. He took the trailer to his home and drove to one of the cattle pens that was not in use. There, he dug 2 holes side by side, 6 feet long, 6 feet deep, and 3 feet wide. He laughed at how easy this was compared to his early career when hole sizes used to please him. He grabbed a shovel and squared out the bottom, just as his father and grandfather had taught him. When Carol came home, she saw the boys in the cattle pens and asked about the holes. They said everything was fine but wondered about the holes. She smiled and said, "Have you ever figured out what's on your dad's mind?" Then they all had a good laugh. She didn't even ask him about it at dinner, knowing she wouldn't understand. Gabe's success in business was due to his ability to analyze each situation and make a plan. His skills allowed his father to retire and move to Southwest Florida. He was willing to risk his marriage if his plan failed. Gabe called the Met in New York and inquired about the Rolando Ramirez show next month. After several phone transfers, a woman informed him there was no such showing. He thanked her and proceeded with the next part of his plan. Gabe had installed locators on all the pickup trucks and large equipment, both for efficiency and possible theft recovery. He quickly installed a unit in Carol's car and added a locator to her cell phone, which was on the company's plan. He started reviewing her emails and texts but found no indication of romantic or sexual communication between Carol and Rolando. Their messages discussed where they would eat and what shows they would see while in New York, but nothing about the art show. Gabe wondered if this was just a trip for the two of them or if she was being duped so that the slimy Spaniard could get into her pants. From the locator, he discovered where they were meeting on Thursday nights. It wasn't what he expected. He was afraid they were at the nicest hotel in the city, not a warehouse. He drove his pickup to the warehouse studio, parked a block away, and walked over. He couldn't see anything as the doors were locked and any windows were too high to see through. He backed up his pickup to the closest window and stood on the sideboards to look inside. What he saw almost knocked him off the pickup. It was his wife nude on a couch with the slime ball painting her portrait. They were talking and laughing while his brushes transposed her image to canvas. He sat back from his easel and motioned her to him. She rose and strolled nonchalantly toward him, not bothering to put on the robe that lay at her feet, her curves gently jiggling as she walked on stiletto heels. Gabe was ready to shatter the window with his fist but decided to wait to see what happened next. He had his cell phone camera ready to record any infidelity. As Rolando backed away from his easel, Gabe saw that he, too, was naked. This made him fume with rage, hot enough to melt the glass in front of him. His love of over 20 years stood nude next to this skinny man as they discussed something. The slimeball had the audacity to put his hand on her bare ass as he made a point. Carol made a half-turn with her body and gave his face a strong slap, followed by shaking her index finger at him while speaking. Rolando laughed, but Carol didn't. Her pose, legs slightly spread, hands on full hips, with her breasts moving with every heavy breath, turned both Gabe and Rolando on. Then she stomped back to her position on the couch while Rolando rubbed his cheek. When the painting session was over, Carol put on her street clothes before giving Rolando a goodbye hug and kiss on the cheek. Rolando tried to approach her, but she deftly moved to hug him sideways instead of head-on. Gabe now knew she was not cheating yet, but she was spending a lot of time with him nude. That concerned him enough to purchase another motion-detecting camera and place it on the window at the warehouse. He also installed a locator on Rolando's rental car to see if they were meeting elsewhere. Carol and Gabe were pleasant and loving with each other at home, so long as they did not discuss Carol's intention of going to New York. Carol was busy preparing for a black tie fundraising gala that would feature the Spanish artist's work. Included in the program were accomplishments of local artists and various talented children. 2 nights before the gala, Carol came home a little late because she had gone shopping after work. Gabe was outside when she drove up, saw packages and hanging clothes, and offered to help her bring them into the house. He knew she wanted a new dress for the gala but asked why she had purchased several other items. "New clothes for my trip to New York on Friday," she said. He thought about dropping them on the ground and walking away, but that would create more strife. Instead, he said, "Make sure you keep the receipts to return those clothes without wearing them." She snapped, "Do you think I'll be in New York naked?" Glaring at her, he said, "That'll be the last thing you ever do." She noticed that could be taken 2 ways, one positive and one very negative. Either way, it really pissed her off, and she said, "What do you mean by that?" Shrugging, he said, "Never mind. It's not going to happen, so why argue about it?" "Don't tell me what to do," she snapped. She also changed her mind. Her portrait was to be seen only by her husband, but to show him she could do what she wanted, the portrait would be the feature of the gala the next day. Since Carol had not been happy with him the last couple of weeks, she asked, "Are you sure you want to go tonight?" "I don't mind if you stay home. It's better than starting a fight with Rolando." "I'm fine," was his response. The food menu was heavy on hors d'oeuvres, but that wasn't the only thing being served. The waiters had a hard time keeping all the glasses of champagne and wine full. Rolando spent a lot of time with the ladies in their low-cut evening gowns. He hoped to add a couple of new conquests before he left town with Carol in a couple of days. He was also looking forward to the verbal humiliation he planned to heap on that stupid ditch digger tonight. The last items on the agenda included some comments by Carol, comments by Rolando, the unveiling of the draped portrait on the main wall, and then requests for continued funding for the Arts Commission. Gabe knew the schedule except for the portrait being unveiled. He stationed himself near the front, but to the side of the small podium where Carol would speak. Carol always publicly thanked him for supporting her, and he wondered if she would do so this year. Carol concluded her remarks without acknowledging Gabe. Rolando gushed about all the wonderful people he had met and who would remain forever in his heart. Carol and Rolando grabbed the corners of the veiled portrait as she told the crowd, "Now for the finale of our year with the artist Rolando Ramirez and an original painting." They slowly pulled the cover off. At first, there were gasps and whispers as patrons recognized the subject. Slight applause was followed by, "Bravo! Wonderful, and excellent." Rolando made sure to step into the limelight in front of the portrait and said, "This is one of the most beautiful subjects I have ever had," greatly emphasizing, "had." "I want to thank her accepting husband, Gabriel, for letting me use his wife for the past month. She was such a willing subject and obeyed my every suggestion. I will now give her back to the guy she calls her husband. Thank you." At this point, all eyes were on Gabe for the obvious implications of Rolando's relationship with his wife. Was this mountain of a man really such a cuckold? While Rolando turned toward a tall blonde he had targeted for later that night, Gabe grabbed the microphone away from him. He stepped forward and said, "Isn't he a fun guy to be around? Always teasing and always doing or saying something outrageous. I call him my favorite little spaniel. Just a silly guy." Some people caught that he used the word spaniel instead of Spaniard. Was he calling Rolando a dog to his face? They thought this might be interesting. Our favorite spaniel did not get to thank many of the local people who helped create this masterpiece. First off, I need to thank Best Buy for providing the app that allowed a guy like Rolando to convert a photo into the paint-by-numbers format. Carol gave him a photo of herself that I took earlier this year. It really saved Carol a lot of time by not having to lie naked on a couch. Thanks to Bob at Tractor Supply, who donated a piece of canvas to imprint the app on so Rolando could paint it. By this time, the crowd had gotten into Gabe's routine and were dying of laughter. They had never seen anything like it. He was funnier than ever with his dry wit. The more he talked, the funnier it was. Continuing, he said, Midwest Ace Hardware supplied all the paint for the paint by numbers portion. This was the only time that Rolando and Carol had a disagreement. Rolando wanted to use nipple pink, but Carol demanded the more exotic, arouse rose. Of course, just like at our house, Carol won the argument. By this time, men were bent over with laughter while the wives had handkerchiefs to their eyes to avoid ruining their makeup. When the laughter died down a bit, Gabe started up again. Of course, Rolando did not use the whole gallon of aroused rose, so we are going to auction the remainder later this evening. Ladies, if you want to increase the libido in your bedroom, please consider an accent wall of aroused rose to get your husband in the mood. Howling laughter erupted again, stopping whatever Gabe was going to say next. Carol was actually smiling at him, glad that he was not having a volcanic fit of anger at her. Rolando, however, was beside himself with anger. His face was red, and his dark eyes were boring a hole in Gabe's back. It took a few moments to quiet the crowd as Gabe held up his hands. All laughter aside, I want you to realize the amount of commitment Carol has to this organization. Just like Lady Godiva, this portrait displays total dedication to her cause, reminding people that we need the arts to complete ourselves. So as you consider your generous donations for this coming year, please look at the portrait not as a beautiful woman, but as someone who really cares and is willing to put herself out for the cause. Carol Martin Digger, please step up and let us thank you for pushing the envelope for a great cause. At this point, Carol stepped in front of the podium but was too overwhelmed to speak and choked up with love for her man. She bowed as the entire audience roared their approval. She lip-synced the words, thank you, to the crowd and, I love you, to Gabe. Still holding the microphone, Gabe said, now that your hearts have been opened, please open up your wallets to keep this great organization a jewel in our community. To start this off, Gravediggers Incorporated will contribute $10,000 to our Arts Commission tonight. Thank you all for your work and care for this organization. No matter how large or small, it is appreciated. Thank you for all you do, and keep in mind for all your cemetery needs, please remember Gravediggers Incorporated. Once more, the crowd roared at what the big, quiet man had to say. Gabe laid the microphone down, turned to Carol, gave her a kiss, and said, you look lovely in that portrait. Thank you for what you said to the patrons. With that, patrons approached Carol with checks and commitments to support the Arts Commission. Gabe walked away to get a drink, and Rolando approached him, offering his hand and saying, I'm returning your wife to you now. I spent a lot of time with her, sometimes painting, sometimes in more personal interactions. Gabe smiled and replied, if you did have personal interactions with her, I doubt she'd remember much. She's accustomed to more impressive experiences than what you might offer. Rolando took offense and swung at Gabe, but Gabe anticipated the move, gripping Rolando's hand tightly and causing him pain. Rolando stumbled off to find an ice bucket. When Carol arrived home later, she was visibly upset. A big guy like you afraid of a painter's slap? You're just a bully using your strength. Gabe tried to explain, but she snapped, leave me alone. I need to pack for my trip. Gabe tried to reason with her, but she threw a shoe in his direction as he left the room. On Thursday afternoon, Gabe saw that Rolando was at the warehouse while Carol was at her office. Deciding it was time to confront Rolando, Gabe went to the warehouse, where he caught Rolando coming out with his briefcase. Gabe struck Rolando in the stomach and then restrained him, tying his hands and feet. He discovered a FedEx box containing Carol's portrait, which was ready to be sent to New York, and took it along with the briefcase. Once Rolando had caught his breath, he began to insult Gabe, but a sharp slap silenced him. Gabe then transported Rolando to the farm and threw him into a recently dug hole. Rolando's fear of confined spaces quickly became apparent as he began to panic and cry. Gabe covered the hole with a plywood sheet, leaving Rolando's face exposed. He sat on the plywood and looked at the terrified artist. "My wife means everything to me. If she leaves, I have nothing left. To ensure I don't lose her, you're going to have to die." This set off more frantic cries from Rolando. Gabe continued, "You have 6 feet by 3 feet by 2 feet of air, minus the space your body takes up. You'll have 2 bottles of water, which should last about a week. Without a watch, you'll be in complete darkness, wondering when the air will run out or when you'll die of thirst or starvation. You'll be in a cattle pen, and the animals will make your grave their toilet until your bones turn to dust." He let this sink in before adding, "Do you understand why you're here?" Rolando, still panicked, said, "I never had any personal involvement with Carol. I was only supposed to have her help with the exhibition setup." Gabe pressed, "You had no intention of anything beyond professional interaction?" Rolando confirmed this, adding that he thought if he got her out of town, he could pursue a relationship with her, believing she deserved better than her current surroundings. Gabe snarled, "You've ruined many lives with your manipulations, breaking up marriages and causing suffering. You've left countless people in despair. I know taking a life is a grave sin, but I hope that by ending yours, I'm preventing further harm to others. It's a tragic situation." Gabe placed a pre-cut plexiglass sheet on the makeshift coffin to cover Rolando's head and shoulders and began shoveling dirt onto the plywood. When there were 3 feet of dirt on the plywood, Gabe lifted up the plexiglass to look at Rolando's face one last time. Gabe was met with the stench of Rolando urinating and himself from fear. He said, "You caused this," then shoveled dirt onto the plexiglass, covering his face. Unknown to Rolando, Gabe had placed a 2-inch PVC pipe near his feet to ensure he did not die of suffocation. It took another foot of dirt before he could no longer hear Rolando's screaming. Gabe laughed as he walked back to his truck. Happily, he thought, that should scare the hell out of him. "I'll go back sometime on Saturday, dig him up, and tell him never to come back. If that doesn't cure him of destroying marriages for his personal pleasure, I'm sure some despondent husband will kill him." He giggled and laughed as the locator on Carol's car moved back and forth between the warehouse and his apartment, apparently trying to find Rolando. Funny, he thought, when she gets home tonight, hell'll be right under her nose. Gabe was in a good mood that evening and disregarded any snide remarks from his wife. It appeared she was trying to provoke him to justify her trip to New York. She even mentioned Rolando's name a couple of times, but she couldn't draw a crossword out of him. Surely she thought her husband still cared for her and wanted her back. Maybe he didn't want me back if I have sex with Rolando. What if her rejection of his strongest feelings was enough for him to no longer care for her? She really did love him but wanted to go to New York. She had no plans to have sex with the Spaniard, but it might happen because of his charm. They did spend a lot of time naked together, and sometimes she was aroused by him. She was concerned that she hadn't talked to Rolando since lunch. He said they were going over travel plans that afternoon. Friday morning, after kissing Kim and Carrie goodbye, she asked Gabe to take her bags downstairs and to the car. "No need. You're not going anywhere," he replied disgustedly. She grabbed the handle and dragged each suitcase down the wooden steps by herself, making as much noise and scratches as possible. It took her several trips, but she was finally loaded and went back into the house. She walked up to him as he was refilling his coffee cup and said in a very deadpan manner, "Goodbye. I'll see you when I get back. I love you." He held her arm and said, "Remember, I have always, and I mean always, loved you and only you. Everything I do is for you. Please don't forget that we complete each other." He had a tear in his eye as she kissed him and then walked away. Here came the hardest task for Gabe. He was going to go through Rolando's cell phone and laptop to research correspondence between his wife and the Spaniard. He only looked for her calls or texts on the cell phone. He didn't care about any other conversations. A small booklet of passwords fell out of the laptop case, making his job easier. Neither the texts nor the emails disclosed any sexual activity or flirting with Carol. However, there was a running conversation with someone listed as X1X, no name, just X1X. That intrigued him. What he read chilled him to the bone. X1X asked, "What is the plan for this girl you got knocked up down there?" His response was, "I'll bring her to New York, put her in the house, and wait until the kid is born. The woman is very good looking, and we can sell the baby for at least $155,000. We'll let the girl heal up for a week or two, then we can either put her in the stable or sell her outright to Africa or the Middle East. 20-year-old natural blondes can bring us at least $45,000. X1X emailed, "What's the plan with Carol?" Rolando replied, "This is personal. My goal is to completely humiliate her and then send the evidence to her unsuspecting husband. She'll be caught in a situation that'll cause her immense embarrassment and shame. We'll manipulate her for a while, and then when we're done, he'll make sure her husband knows everything that happened. She'll bear the mark of this forever, and I'll ensure she's reminded of it every time she looks in the mirror." Gabe went wild. My God, what a horrible person. How many mothers cry themselves to sleep at night worried that their daughter is in danger? There is no way he can be allowed to continue this type of decadence. In a rage, he shouted into the PVC air tube, "Hey, stupid, you wanted to put a tattoo on my wife? I'll show you how worms make tattoos on the human body. You will die a long, slow death on your way to hell." He pulled out the air tube, completed filling the hole, and scattered a combination of dust and dried cow manure over the grave to make it look undisturbed. He copied the incriminating email about Carol and brought the computer and cell phone to the local sheriff for transfer to the FBI. After reviewing the horrible emails, the sheriff asked if Carol and Chloe knew of their plans. Solemnly, Gabe said no and suggested it would be best if the sheriff contacted both of them. Late that afternoon, Carol dejectedly drove into their yard. Her plans were blown to bits, both Rolando and her trip to New York had vanished. The sheriff showed her what that despicable Rolando had planned for her and Chloe. She couldn't believe he could be so cold-heartedly evil. She knew that Gabe had been right the entire time. She had ignored and berated him for his opinion. As she parked her car, she noticed a change in the yard. One of the holes in the cattle pen was filled in, just like it had never been there. She thought it odd but needed to go to their home and make up with Gabe. As she looked toward the house, she saw the shadowy frame of Gabe in the doorway. The large man loomed ominously in the evening light. The giant did not wave to her but turned and walked back into the house, out of sight. The house was quiet as she entered, too quiet. She took a few steps and saw Gabe sitting in his office, drinking a scotch and wordlessly looking at her. Then she saw it, the portrait, her portrait, on the wall in Gabe's office. Rolando was supposed to ship that to New York today. Why did Gabe have it? Her hazy, confused brain began to gain clarity. She looked at the filled-in hole. Was it a grave? Whose grave? There was only one person missing, Rolando. She turned her gaze back and forth between Gabe and her portrait on the wall. Her head spun as she tried to piece together the variables in this equation. Suddenly, it was crystal clear, Rolando was buried in the cow pen. Wild panic swept over her. Who was to be buried in the other grave? There was no one left in this storm but me. Am I going to disappear in the grave next to Rolando? Did he think I had sex with Rolando and now I am to disappear? She cried as she hugged his chest and said, "Oh my God, I have been so wrong about Rolando. I never had sex with him, you know that, don't you? Cheating on you would be the last thing I would ever do." He slowly moved away from her and looked into her eyes. Carol saw no emotion, just two calm eyes. A chill went down her spine. Gabe then slowly took a step closer to her and said, "Make sure you always listen to your loving husband when he says you need to cut ties with someone. You don't berate him, listen to him. As for cheating on me, you are absolutely right, Carol. It would indeed be the last thing you ever do. Gabe walked up to her, hugged her tight, and kissed her on the forehead. The FBI used Rolando's cell phone and computer to capture and incarcerate the deviants who had created the sex trafficking operation. They could not locate Rolando and surmised he had gone underground. Carol's portrait remained in Gabe's office, however, the door was usually locked, preventing Kim and their friends from admiring it. The Arts Commission used the generous gifts from the gala to plan a larger children's program for the next year. The priority would be to use local talent rather than the traveling artist program. Carol and Gabe didn't go to work the next day, they needed to reconnect and refresh after a very troubling week. Gabe filled in the empty grave and hid a camera to see if Carol would go near the pen. She never went anywhere close to it. A week later, Gabe and Carol left for a few days in New York City, hiring a docent for a 2-day private tour of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Carol later referred to it as their second honeymoon.